Hello, everybody. I believe I'm on right now, and I just want to welcome all of you, to our broadcast today called Places Revealing That Life Has Meaning. This is a very special presentation that allows us to explore some themes that oftentimes are left aside. And it has to do with having transformative and life-changing experiences and how those things can happen to our lives. So today we have a couple of very interesting guests who are going to be addressing those questions based on their own experience. The three of us, I'm Nicole Myers, Mike Ishii, and Michael Cameron are all active volunteers in the Parks of Study and Reflection. Just to give you a little bit of background, these spaces have been created throughout the world. And currently there are 50 parks like this, forming a constellation of parks around the world. Each one is unique unto itself, but all of them have some common elements, which we will talk about. So let's begin by looking at one of the parks, and if David, who is assisting me in this, could play Toledo. So that was Toledo Park of Study and Reflection. It's in Spain. And if you saw that there's this unusual building that is shaped like a dome with 4 entrances, which is the center of the park. We will be talking to our guest about that particular building, and because it's a transformative building. It has special attributes to it. It's a meditation hall, but you will be hearing the word sala as an affectionate way that we refer to the hall. So before beginning, for those of you who are not familiar with our work, the Parks of Study and Reflection were originally created by Silo. For some of you, he is best known as a spiritual guide through Silo's message. But he was also a very prolific writer, a philosopher, a visionary, and he was the founder of Universal Humanism and a leader in active nonviolence. In 2002, he presented Silo's message, which speaks of a new spirituality that has awakened from its deep sleep to nurture the best aspirations of the human being. Silo lived his life in Mendoza, Argentina, and departed in 2010. He began his teaching in the Andean mountains near where he lived in 1969 with a very profound talk called The Healing of Suffering. There, in that part of the world, which is an outpost near the highest mountain in the west, called the Aconcagua, is the Mother Park, and it's known as Punta De Vancus. Silo envisioned the parks to be sacred places, as beacons of light, where people could get away from their daily lives to reconnect. to reconnect and discover the profound within themselves. They bring together people of all kinds, of all beliefs, of all ages, of all ethnicities and races, because we believe there is a convergence in diversity. The parks of study and reflection are places that are capable of revealing meaning, that life has meaning. And in today's world, where there seems to be such a lack of meaning and a new search for a deeper meaning in our lives, we wanted to present this as a possibility for those of you who are in that search. Today's presentation is part of our campaign to build a meditation hall at our park, at the Hudson Valley Park of Study and Reflection, a beautiful place about 2 hours north of New York City. This will be the first hall to be built of its kind in North America. And we want to tell you all about it and what it can do and how it could be important for your life. And so let's begin to see the testimony of our two guests. I'd like to begin with Michael Cameron, who is from our sister park in California, Red Bluff.
Hey, everybody. When I was 19, I was really on the verge of suicide. And I was lucky enough to find a meditation hall almost identical to the one that's being proposed in Hudson Valley. And it was a place that really saved my life. I was able to connect to my profound internal guides there and just ask to be able to leave my trauma, to be able to find a way out of this like trap that I found myself constantly running into the same. And it was a place where for the first time I was able to get an inkling that my life had a real meaning. And after that, I just slowly felt this light building up within me. And when I got back home, I realized I was able to share that with other people. And I noticed that this was something that felt genuine and authentic because it's been growing for the last 10 years. And I want to support the hall in New York because I know that this is something that a lot of people are going through. And I know a lot of people are looking for meaning. They're looking for something genuine, and they're looking to build community. And I know that if a hall is built in New York, it's going to be the place where the different communities can gather. It's going to be a place where all the tribes meet to talk about how to overcome the injustices that we're going through, how to build communities based on nonviolence. And for me, that is essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So, I'd like to also now bring in Mike, and Mike Ishii is from New York City, and he's with us here, and he's one of the volunteers at the Hudson Valley Park of Study and Reflection.
Hi, my name is Mike Ishii, and I'm a community member at the Hudson Valley Park of Study and Reflection. And I've been connected to the movement for about 5 years. A year ago, well, in May of last year, I should say, I went to Punta De Vancus for the 50th anniversary of the healing of suffering. And it was at that time that I stepped inside a sala for the first time in my life. What happened to me there was later explained to me as an experience of the Force. And actually, at that time, I had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And I had gone to Punta De Vancus knowing that I was asking for something. I get a little emotional talking about this. Inside the sala there, I heard Silo's voice say to me in Espanol, ask for what you truly need. And what I heard my own voice reply was, ayúdame, ayúdame. And in that moment, I experienced the force. At Manantiales and at La Reja, I had these incredible experiences of human love. And my partner explained to me, what you're feeling is the charged energy of these communities, these beautiful communities connected to these parks. And I think it was in those three salas that I was healed. And so being in the parks and in the salas truly gave me my future back. And so I'm speaking to you from New York City in 2020. Queens, where I live, is the center of the coronavirus pandemic in this country, and where many people of color and immigrants have died, and there is a tremendous suffering here. At the same time, we're having uprisings across the country because of the economic and racial violence targeting Black people and people of color here in the United States. So there's a tremendous amount of injustice and violence that we are facing in this moment and have faced here historically. And it's in this moment that I really understand the importance of the parks of study and reflection. We are at a moment in the world where we could plunge into darkness, or we could transform and create a human nation for the future. In this moment, we're trying to build our sala here in New York at Hudson Valley. And I just feel like the experience I had at Punta De Vancus refers from that moment to this moment, which is I'm asking for your help. There is so much work that we need to do in this part of the world where so much violence has emanated from. And I'm committed to doing that work with everyone here and with all of you around the world. So I thank you for your support. I want to say that I wish you peace, force, and joy. And I send you my love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. So let's bring in Michael. Now we have him live, dynamic, on stage here with me. How are you?
Doing
Michael?
well, thank you.
Michael. So let me introduce some of you to Michael who don't know him. He became interested in Silo's message when he was 18. He was always exploring different kinds of spirituality. At the same time, he was an activist, working at freeing political prisoners, working for students of color. And currently he is helping to develop one of our parks in Red Bluff, which is in Northern California, near Sacramento. And he also runs a community center for Silo's message in Oakland. So you're a busy guy.
That's right.
So I heard your testimony, and it was very moving. And you're young, and you grew up in San Francisco before it was gentrified. So you know very well that the problem of suicide in this country is very high, and it's currently at rates, the highest rates it's ever been in the U.S. for teens and for youth. So I think what you have to say is very important, because not only did you have an experience, but since then you have come to help so many other people. So could you tell us more about that experience and and how you got there, if you could.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, one of the most important parts of it is that I wasn't experiencing any extraordinary circumstances. I was just another person.
Have we lost Mike? Oh, there we are.
So what I was saying was that I didn't have any kind of special, extraordinary circumstances that led me to that place. I started feeling suicidal when I was 15, and had recurring thoughts for the following 4 years, And I think what a huge part of it had to do was just the social environment, I felt extremely isolated, even though there were people around me in high school. We didn't know how to communicate with each other in a meaningful way. It was like we were all close together in physical proximity, but each one of us in our individual islands. And, years later, talking to a high school teacher of mine, he said he noticed that between a lot of us, that we put on this veneer that we were doing okay, that we were smiling, but he could feel a real suffering inside of us. So this thing of the high suicide rates it's not really a surprise to me, given the social environment we're in. So I remember one night in particular, walking home from a pretty negative circumstance I'd experienced with some friends of mine. I was walking home alone, and I could feel a big emptiness inside of me. Like everything I was going to aspire for in the future for studying and careers was left me with a big emptiness on the inside. And at some point in feeling this emptiness, I called deep into myself, and I said, I need to find some way to find something real, I felt two paths open before me. I can either move towards suicide, and just exit, or something real can be presented to me. And a few days later, I came home, and a woman was sitting on the couch next to my mom, who had been a friend of her years before. And she said, "Hey, there's this spirituality you might be interested in." And that's how I came to know Silo's message. I immediately felt with this woman, there was something special about her, that she had an energy like I'd never experienced with other people who did that kind of work. And as I traveled, I left California to meet Silo's message communities in France and in Argentina and Chile. And I recognized there was despite their different cultures, there was something really special about these communities. There was a real warmth and a real authenticity I hadn't felt in other places I'd been searching for this.
Right, because you have had a lot of experience in searching.
I had gone to temples, and I'd gone to monasteries, and this was a community that advocated activism, that advocated external change, but also profound internal change.
Right.
And they weren't places that asked me for money or for, a commitment for the rest of my life or anything like that. Right. I was just welcomed and could participate as much as I wanted to.
So, Michael, you're saying that you went to South America. And I have a question for you. Do you remember what happened to you when you first saw the sala, the meditation hall?
Yes.
And when you walked inside?
Yeah, that would have been around March 2011. And I remember that because it was when I was first, getting to know the tools of the message. And when I got to the hall there, it was a time of year where not a lot of people were there. It's a
Hmm.
that park in Punta De Vancus is right on the border of Chile and Argentina, high in the Andes Mountains. It's a pretty isolated place. And I was staying there for 2 weeks, you know. And when I would go into that meditation hall, I would go in using a tool I'd learned called calling to an inner guide. You know, closing your eye. You go into the meditation hall, you sit down, and you try to evoke the image of someone who has strength, wisdom, and kindness. You know, and you can ask them questions or ask for guidance or orientation. And I would ask my internal guide, please show me a way out of this not just loneliness, but this intense feeling of suffering that I felt and had been feeling for so long. And every day for 2 weeks, I'd go into that meditation hall and do this exercise. And, you know, sometimes leaving with tears running down my face, asking with a lot of strength to get out of this situation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't an instant change in myself that I felt. I didn't feel immediately everything was resolved in an instant. But in the weeks that followed that experience, and in the months that followed, I started to wake up with lots of energy. You know, I started to, when I went back home to California, I was really inspired in a way I'd never been in my entire life to start communities that were working for nonviolence.
So you wanted to share this with other people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's a very big gift that you received and were giving to other people. And so let's bring Mike in to see. Hello.
Hi there.
This is all. And you're going to have to give me 1 second, Mike. There we go. So, because I want to introduce you and another very busy, multifaceted person. So Mike Ishii, as he said, he lives in Queens, and he is the co-founder of Shuru for Solidarity, a nonviolence direct action project of Japanese American social justice advocates working to end detention sites and support frontline immigrant and refugee communities experiencing racism and state violence. You are on the money. He was a graduate of Juilliard School and performed extensively with the New York City Orchestra and ensembles, and later transitioned to a career in East Asian medicine. So, Mike, you have a lot of different experiences in your life and a lot to call on. So I think your experience also really spoke to me, and especially the fact that you now were at the moment of facing a diagnosis of fatal cancer, right, or terminal cancer, what they call it, right? So could you tell us more about that? What happened? And here you are.
Yeah, this is sometimes I can't believe my own life story when I look back on it. Well, about 2 years ago, you know, I had generally considered myself a fairly healthy guy, active and healthy guy. But then I suddenly got this diagnosis of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which it turns out that Japanese Americans have the highest prevalence of any group in the world. I didn't know that, which means our people have not adapted well to the Western diet. So I was silently accruing fat in my liver, creating a hyperinflammatory condition in my liver that they then diagnosed me with cirrhosis. And once you're diagnosed with cirrhosis, your prognosis is not good. I was told that I would eventually die of liver cancer or aneurysms that would burst in my stomach or in my brain. So that's what they told me, and I actually didn't truly in my heart believe them. I am a person who has studied Chinese medicine, and also I have studied the teachings of Silo and the humanist movement, and so there's a concept in humanism about having faith,
Mm.
faith in the essential connection to the universe and what's the essence of human being. It's the spark of humanness that's within each person. Every person has this. And I know as a healer that actually can be the source of profound healings. So
Yeah.
I'm also a Taoist priest, by the way. So through my Taoist lineage, I've also studied what we call qi, or the universal force. Some people call that energy. And in humanism, we refer to it often as the force. So, so I had been connected to the teachings of humanism for about 5 or 6 years through my partner. And I was part of a study group, and we heard that there was going to be the 50th anniversary of Silo's first talk on the healing of suffering, which you mentioned in the introduction.
Right.
And, I'd never been to Punta De Vancus, but I had just received this diagnosis, and I was fighting with everything I could figure out to not agree with that diagnosis. And I really brought my game. I brought everything I knew.
Mm-hmm.
That study group was really important, because in the study group that met weekly in New York City that's connected to the Hudson Valley Park, one of the issues we were studying was nonviolence and the transformation of the internal self and the world and society through nonviolence. And so what I realized, and why it was so important for me to go to Punta De Vancus, was that I realized I started understanding my own family history, my own personal history, and examining how violence had affected me. And so I come from a family that experienced intense racism and violence when they immigrated from Japan to the United States. My grandfather was an undocumented immigrant who came to the US as a teenage boy. My whole family was put in concentration camps by the US government during World War II. I had family members in upstate New York during World War II who were executed by a white man who was a World War I veteran, who went into their house and shot them all at point blank. So growing up, we experienced racism in the neighborhood. People shot our windows. They spray painted hate, kill the Japs. They would wait for my father to leave for work, and then they would call my mother, and they would say, "Hey, Jap bitch, we know your husband left, and now we're going to come kill you." So he was experiencing this kind of terror all the time. I was in utero with her in part of that moment. And then I grew up in that environment. So, when you grow up inside a fishbowl, you don't realize that's your world. But now, really, in the last few years in my studies, I started to realize the impact that violence had on me. And I've done a lot of things in the Japanese American community to heal the trauma and violence. It's actually my profession. I do this professionally now as a community organizer with Sudo. But in that moment, with that diagnosis, it all came home to me that there's still something unreconciled within me about the violence that my family internalized and passed on. And so
you felt that had to do with the diagnosis itself?
Oh, for sure.
The disease, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you go to Punta De Vancus on the 50th anniversary.
So
and what did you expect?
Well, I just knew I had to go, and I didn't know why. So I was like, "Hey, we have to go to this," and I'd never been there. So as we drive up into the Andes, I don't know what I thought I expected, but it was the most grand, profound place I've ever visited. The scale, I felt that big compared to the mountains around me. And that's Punta De Vancus is where 3 valleys and 3 rivers comes together. In Chinese medicine, we'd say the qi of that place is very profound. It's the crossing of energies of the world, of the 5 phases or the 5 elements. So there's the sala sitting there, and we arrived there early, and I go and I enter that sala, never having been in one ever in my life. And I approach it, and I'm like, wow, there's something very special about this. Nothing. And I went inside, and there's no one in there. And I just sat down, And then I have this experience that was talked about in the video. You know, in Chinese medicine, we say that you have these energetic centers. We call them dantians in the body. And in that moment, when I experienced the force or the energy go through my body, I felt all of those energetic centers light up inside of me. And I knew this theoretically. I actually understand that it can happen. I'd never experienced anything like that before, but I felt it travel through my body. And I experienced it 2 more times in the 5 days we were there. And I kept wondering, what is this? I didn't understand it at the time. And at first I didn't even talk about it to anybody because I didn't really understand. But as it kept happening over and over again, I began to realize this is related to my own healing, physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. And at one point, the 3rd time it happened, I actually saw almost like flashcards going by me, all of the violence that had happened to my family going generations, and it was reconciling in that moment. It was a very, you know, I can't even believe it happened. It like I remember it very, very much in my body, but at the time, I was sort of like, I was actually outside. We have these. It's called a monolith, but it's a sort of a metal pole that goes up. Really, in Chinese medicine, we call it the Ling Shu, the spirit pivot that connects the energies of heaven and earth. And it's a place in the park that I went to in the middle of a sandstorm that was like blowing like 30 miles an hour.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And I was led there. And then I had this experience of my family's historical trauma, and that in me it could stop. So
everybody's probably asking to themselves, well, how? So you were cured? I mean, you felt cured after you got back. How did that happen with you?
Well, so I should.
But I'm going to ask you very quickly because we have a lot more things to cover, and we do want to do a Q&A. So if people have any questions and answers, but I definitely want to make sure that people know how you did after that and what was.
Sure, I can tell you really quick. Actually, it was like probably days just before we went that I had an MRI, and they said the cirrhosis is gone. You don't have this anymore, and they thought it was a miracle, and they couldn't believe. What are you doing? And I said, but at the same time, I was diagnosed with potential cancer of the prostate, that I had a large mass in my prostate. And so I also went to the park asking about that. And that's actually where I really felt the energetic focus happen. And then I came back, and they said it is shrinking and it is not malignant.
Remarkable. So let's call both of you in if we can. And I want to talk because we're trying to build a meditation hall here at the park, Hudson Valley Park. And people wonder, well, what's this strange building and why is it like that? Or why is it so important? Why do we call it a sacred building? And can you shed any light on that?
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the physical shape of the building is really important because when you enter it, it's almost an empty room. There's no pictures of leaders. There's no writing telling you what to do on the walls. There's no kind of chanting or suggestive things happening. When you go in there and you take a seat in the meditation hall, you're left with a big void, and that void, gives you the opportunity to look inside yourself, to discover your internal world, which today we very rarely have the opportunity to do in front of screens, in front of, all the problems going around us. But also, it's a place where you can meet other people. The benches inside of the hall are set up in concentric circles. So what we like to do in those halls are things like ceremonies of well-being, where we send our best thoughts and energy to our loved ones. We like to do ceremonies of the service to get in touch with that life force that Mike was talking about, and strengthen that within ourselves and direct it in a positive, in an interesting way. When children come into a community of Silo's message, the different communities gather together to do protection, to do a ceremony of protection for those children. And I've seen in some halls that people from different faiths and different religions gather in those halls to have dialogue. You know, those groups that are really dedicated to overcoming violence and overcoming suffering, you know, they gather in the halls to share experiences, to talk about what to do in that local community. So it's a very special form, and I think it creates the conditions for very important things to happen.
Yes, it's a very unique building, and with the 4 entrances also, it's like a mandala, or like the Andean cross. It's like from all directions you come to the center. So I'm going to ask you to move on to another thought, because I think that's, you answered it very beautifully, and there's so much more to talk about this, but I want to make sure we have enough time to get to some of the other things, because I want to talk about the aspect of something like you had brought up about the sala being charged. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Are you referring to like sacred mountains are charged, or places are charged, or rivers are charged, or is that an intentional thing that happens, or how does that work?
Yeah.
From your point of view.
Maybe I'll put on my Chinese Taoist hat for a second to talk about this, because we talk about qi, or ki, or the life force of the universe, and we say it imbues all things. It is all seen and unseen. It also has an intentionality about it. So that's why you can give your qi to someone else as a healing force.
And so you feel that you were mentioned that the community,
Yeah,
like,
so,
because of all of this constant people going in there and looking for that deep space within themselves, or is that how it gets charged?
So places and things can actually act as batteries. They absorb the energies and the intentions of the people around them. That's really the meaning of a talisman, which a talisman is really a container of energy, of force. And so if you think about the salas, like let's go back to Punta De Vancus, where both Michael and I had such, actually, I hear that you also had a very profound experience there, Nicole.
Right.
Many people have. That's not an accident. You know, it's not like, ooh, you know, voodoo magic. It's like, what actually happens there is that people have come from all over the world, and many people who have very, very profound and deep practices of the teachings of Silo and the internal work. And so the communities have come there to do ceremonies, to do meditations, to do askings or prayers, to be sent out. And that sala has become imbued with all of the energy of all of the people of the world. And the way I experienced it there was, you know, if I had a visual image of it, was that there was a multicolored, embodying every color of the prisms of the rainbow, coming up almost like a volcano through that building, that had such a powerful transformation, creational force in it. So if you think about places around the world, like where people, you know, like Mecca, or famous temples, or stupas around the world, or holy sacred sites, these places also have become very imbued with the power of the intentions and the force within people who have come there. And so the salas in the parks around the world, including the one we're trying to build in New York, are so important, because these become sort of almost what I think of as like stars in a constellation, emanating out a positive force for transformation and creation, and they affect the people who come there too. So that's how I think of it.
I think that's, and this is the moment that people are wondering if they can have that experience. So this is an experience that's limited to a select few. This is an experience that is open to anybody, I think. But you both brought up the facts of need and search and intention, and then I also, as you mentioned, I'm not going to talk about here, I've had a very profound experience in that same meditation hall in Punta De Vancus, which changed my life about 10 years ago. Maybe that'll be the topic of another discussion. But what happens after that change happens, you recognize there's a before in your life and an after.
True.
It's like there's a mark, and you want other people to have that experience, at least to have the opportunity to have that experience. That's why it's so important for me to produce this Sala here in North America. Let's go to the explorable. I want to get to the, we have only a couple of questions, so we do have a little bit more time unless people want to ask. I would like to ask people, if you want to send your questions, please do so. We would love to be able to answer things that we're not addressing here. And I want to get into the historical moment and how that relates to the parks. Is there something that you want to add different to that, Mike? Or?
Well, yeah, and it's actually related back to the Sala. You know, the Salas don't transform you. They amplify what is within you, right? This profound energy within the person. And so, you know, that's why these are so important in this moment, because people need places to find. It's like a portal or a gateway, an opportunity to connect to something within yourself. Because really in this moment, people are very scared. They feel very lost, and they feel without reference. And we all keep looking outwards. Who is going to fix this? Is it that election that will fix this? Is it that person? Or if this person was just gone, the suffering would end. And it's actually not probably the root answer. The root answer is transformation of each one of us. And to do that requires a process, an intention, a decision to look inside and transform, and then become an agent of transformation to all around us, right? Every one of us who shines bright lights up the darkness around us. And if every one of us then lit ourselves, then we can help light the world, you know.
And at the same time, people would feel much better. It's not like,
truly, I mean,
it's not a sacrifice. It's on the contrary, that shining light inside you radiates and changes everything in the way you look at things. So.
Well, you know, it really is truly about how do you end your own suffering.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you can try to end other people's suffering, but if you don't end your own suffering, you're not authentic there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
and you generally share that suffering with other people as you do that.
Truly.
I'm very generous with my suffering.
I know that, like, Michael and I, we've talked, you know, we've both been sort of anti-racism and anti-oppression activists most of our lives since we were both, you know, he's still young. I'm not young anymore, but since I was young too. And, you know, right now in this part of the world, in North America, there's a reckoning happening that the extreme non-equity, the extreme systemic racism and state violence toward Black people, towards immigrants, towards poor people is really threatening to destroy the society. And there is a moment here where people are looking for reference for something new. This has not worked for a long time for most people of the world. And now Western, very wealthy nations that have accrued and hoarded the equity and resource of the world, it's not working here anymore either. That doesn't solve any of the suffering. And so we're coming to this point where if we don't actually figure out something different, we could really plunge into a very long period of intense human suffering. Right. So I think that the teachings that we're trying to embody, that I try to embody every day in my nonviolence work, organizing, you know, I was just at the Berks detention site where they're imprisoning and incarcerating Haitian families, and they're trying to take children away from their parents permanently. Like, how could you do that? That's the most cruel thing, to take a child from their family. You know,
it's endless violence, and what happens is, like in your case, the violence that was committed against your parents continued to live within you for all your life. It's not.
It goes
just a one-off. It goes past
generation.
Yeah.
The trauma passes on for sure. But I know Michael doing all sorts of work there.
Michael, tell us about, because you mentioned in your testimony, which I thought was very interesting, that you wanted to build communities of nonviolence.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Could you tell us
And
more?
I think the way we see it here, is that we've got violence, not just physical violence, right? We've also got economic violence. We've got psychological violence, moral violence, religious, racial, sexual. We've got violence in so many different expressions that when we start to look at it, we see that the root of a lot of it is within ourselves, right? And in order to address that, right, the only coherent way that we can see to do that is through really trying to comprehend that violence, where it stems from, and at the same time that we're out in the community doing that work, struggling for social justice, we're also going really deep to understand the violence within ourselves and surpass that. And when I think when I was younger, when I was in my teens, and then in my early 20s, I tried to do a lot of work with the Occupy movement, with student unions, making big changes happen really fast, and it was really exciting. But I started to notice that there was like a lot of contradictions between the different activists I was working with, a lot of, bad treatment between them, and ego boosting and doing things for your Facebook picture, and going out with it, and
That's so true. That's so true.
And not to talk about the inner contradiction, the violence just inside of each one, And so what I found super inspiring about the message was that I could continue to do work with my local community. We have a neighborhood center right here in East Oakland. I could continue to do that sustained community work, but I could offer so much more to the people there. A lot of people who come are really interested in getting out and in fighting all different kinds of systemic violence. But we also offer weekly experiences for people to have internal transformations right here in the community, Yeah. And that to me is what building a community for nonviolence is building these really deeply rooted, strong bonds with people.
That's so important, because with all of the answers that are being given are so superficial. They're just like patchwork, and we need to get to another level. I think that's what I'm hearing from you. You need an evolutionary leap, a new level of consciousness, a new understanding of who we are as human beings, and what is our purpose and what is our meaning here, and that those fundamental themes are something that are encouraged and explored and deepened. Yes. It's like the best moments of your life are not in those moments where everything is me, me, me. It's in the moment where you connect with something deep within yourself and with other people. I want to move on to some questions, and I think those answers you've given are just fantastic. And we have so many more things to talk about, but we have a couple questions. So, question from Mike: what in the experience you spoke about it made it easier for you to affect change in the way you were thinking and feeling?
That's a great question. When I was actually in 3 different salas within 2 weeks. So I went to Punta De Vancus, then I went to another park in Chile, in Santiago called Manantiales, and then in Buenos Aires I went to La Reja, and so I had experiences actually in all 3 of those salas. And something that I experienced there was a feeling of reconciliation with myself. Like there was a kindness and a tenderness toward myself that I had not experienced before. The only way I can describe it is that there was an incredible, I still fight it, an internal harshness with myself. I can be very mean internally to myself when I don't succeed in, like, I will blame myself for the struggles that really come from having been targeted in different ways. and then I get mad at myself that I can't overcome them, and I can be very, it's like a viciousness that can cycle through me. And in those parks, there was a sense of that was done, like enough already. And you know, I can't say that it remained that way permanently, but it's far less. And that period becomes a reference point for me now, because now I know what it could be to not have that cycling through me. And there was a sense of my body felt good there. I felt better than I had in years there. And but there was a lightness to my spirit that kind of affected everything as a result.
Michael, do you want to quickly answer the same question, or should we move on to the next question?
Let's move on to the next question.
Okay. So Robbie, what is the construction schedule of the sala?
Nicole, do you think you can answer that question?
I will try to. That's a very good question, Robbie. We are currently under contract. We're getting the contract signed to do the prep work for the foundation, which is very important. It's quite an extensive prep work for that. And then the sala is going to be built by a company that's coming from Idaho, and it's a very special type of construction. They are tentatively scheduled to be here sometime in the next month. Now, with the COVID situation, I think they're being a little bit cautious and to finalize the date. So we hope that it's going to be done, the first phase of the sala construction, within the next 2 or 3 months. After that, we will have another phase that has to do with building out the walls, and that's a lot easier because we're not under the dependent. It's something that we can do more locally, etc. So we're now beginning to. We have any other questions? And if not, let's go to the final part of this discussion and wrap it up. Are there any other comments that you would like to make, Michael or Mike? And maybe we should explain how, if people are interested, how they can participate and how they can help.
Yeah, one thing I think is super important, just before we wrap up, is that these parks, right, these 50 or 60 parks that exist around the world, they're all autonomous. You know, there's nothing about these parks that's governed by some kind of central NGO or you know, each one of these parks, you know, is basically sustained by the people in the local place. You know, and I think that's really important, because when you walk into a park, you know, you don't see a sign that says brought to you by Bill and Melinda Gates or by Mark Zuckerberg or Coca-Cola. You know, these are parks that are sustained by 100% by unpaid volunteers. You know, and so I just want to say that I really hope that people grasp the need for them right now. You know, we are in an intense crisis as a species. You know. And I don't think it's too much to say that a large part of our condition for the next few hundreds or thousands of years depends on the existence of places like these. So I really hope that people, you know, give to the construction of this, that they contribute to it. And I wanted to say thank you so much to all the volunteers in Hudson Valley who have made this possible.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your help, Michael. And we will be helping Red Bluff too, because this is the first. But once one gets built, it's easier than maybe for others to begin appearing elsewhere. So this is just the beginning of a process in North America. And Mike?
Yeah, you know what I wanted to say was that these parks are also, they belong to the world. They are for everyone. These are not like private sanctuaries for small groups of people. These are like centers for humanity. I have been a performing artist. I'm a healer. I'm a community organizer. I'm a political activist, and I've been a frontline activist right now against state violence. And so I guess what I want to say is that having worn different hats like that, I've always been looking for social change and transformation in the world, because I always recognize that things are not working for people. And if the most vulnerable person in the room is being stepped on, then we're not winning. Like, this is not okay. And so how do we reach for each other and bring everyone together along? No one gets left behind here. That's always been my life work. And when I went to Punta De Vancus and I was in the salas, I was like, wow, I've been studying with this group, but then I got very serious about it because I had a transformation of my life and a healing moment there. And what I've come to realize was that the teachings of Mario Rodriguez, CeeLo, you all should check him out, because I'm also a student of the teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. and other world, philosophical change leaders. CeeLo was perhaps the most profound leader I have come across. And it's interesting, I think largely due to racism and the centrism of North America, his teachings are not, his teachings and his life work are not well understood in North America. And that's another reason why the Hudson Valley Park and Red Bluff Parks are so important, because they're trying to transmit the information, and people need good information right now. We need good information, good perspective. So I'm gonna, I work in the park as a volunteer, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who listened to our stories today. But I am really making a personal request to you, which is, if you are looking for a place to find a connection to transformation for everyone, for a better world, then start with the teachings here. Check them out on our website, hudsonvalleypark.org. We have a fundraising tab on that page. We have a Facebook page. You can discover us there. But as a person working against state violence at this moment, I know that this work that I'm doing at the park is important for me, for my own sustainability. And so I'm encouraging and asking you, please get involved. Please support this effort. It is so important in this moment. Thank you.
And we just want to meet all of you too. And I want to close with, there's also another thing that we are doing now, because with the COVID, we are doing a lot of online ceremonies. So people are free to join in those ceremonies, and just check out the website, and we'll put that information there. I want to end with, since you talk so much about CeeLo's teachings, and there's a book called CeeLo's Message. It's a very small book, but it's very profound. And the first chapter says meditation. So we're talking about a meditation hall, and I just want to read a few lines. Here it tells how the non-meaning of life can be converted into meaning and fulfillment. Here are joy, love of the body, of nature, of humanity, and of the spirit. Here are sacrifices. Feelings of guilt and threats from the beyond are rejected. Here the worldly is not opposed to the eternal. Here it tells of the inner revelation at which all arrive who carefully meditate in humble search. So with that, I think you were able to express in your words and your actions the deep meanings that are found in those writings. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, David. And to all the volunteers who have been supporting our project, to all the people who have already given, to all those who are planning to give. We want a world that's filled with peace and nonviolence and transformative actions. Thank you.